Ukraine's president says that he is ready to hold elections if Kyiv's allies can ensure the polls' security. The presidential term of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who has been meeting with European allies this week, expired in May 2024. The Ukrainian parliament's mandate ended a few months later in August. The United States under President Donald Trump has voiced support for Ukraine to hold elections. But the country's constitution states that elections, whether presidential, parliamentary, or local, cannot be held under martial law. In a voice note to journalists, Zelenskyy said that he has asked Ukrainian lawmakers to draw proposals on how the election law could be amended.
Look, I'm ready for the elections. Not only that, but I'm now asking, and I'm saying this openly, for the United States to help me, possibly together with our European colleagues, to ensure security for the elections. Then, in the next 60 to 90 days, Ukraine will be ready to hold elections. I personally have the will and the readiness to do so. Furthermore, since this is how things have turned out, I'm asking the members of our faction, in principle our parliamentarians, to prepare legislative proposals on the possibility of changing the legislative framework and the law on elections during martial law.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Nick Connolly, who's joining us from Kyiv. So, Nick, Zelenskyy says that he's willing to hold elections. How exactly would this work, and is that something that many Ukrainians want?
We heard Zelenskyy there saying that it would happen if security were provided and if parliamentarians want it to happen. Those are two very, very big ifs. I can't really see it happening until there's at least some kind of ceasefire. Realistically, how are soldiers going to vote? How are people near the front lines where there are constant drone attacks going to vote? That is all very difficult to see happening. But equally, this is about Zelenskyy showing openness to what the Trump White House wants of him, right? We've had Trump recently in frustration at what Trump sees as Zelensky's unwillingness to sign a deal and basically end this problem in a hurry, as Trump wants, asking out loud about Zelensky's legitimacy. As you mentioned there, the Ukrainian Constitution doesn't allow for elections during martial law. So I think for now this is more about the kind of rhetorical kind of optics about Zelenskyy showing some openness there, but whether it actually happens, whether those MPs sign off on that, I think is still unclear. As for the kind of public opinion, even people who are very, very critical of Zelenskyy, of those corruption scandals we've seen around Zelenskyy in the last couple of weeks, they are not asking for elections. They are not pushing for elections. There's been basically a consensus in this country since Russia invaded in 2022 to leave internal politics for the future, for the time after the war, and to focus on basically, surviving as a nation. And I think that is going to be a real danger for Ukraine if internal politics are reactivated and you get all those kind of different parties trying to jockey for influence, that then Ukraine stops paying attention to the front lines and gets more occupied with itself. And that is obviously something that the Russian side really wants Ukraine to have, big internal divisions, potentially street protests, different political parties fighting each other rather than focusing on the front lines. So it is a real dangerous kind of prospect, and lots of people here are very worried about the idea of elections during wartime.
Nick, Kyiv has been under immense U.S. pressure. What else are the Trump administration's demands?
Well, the big thing for now seems to be the demand that Ukraine sign off on basically giving up Donetsk region, even the bits of Donetsk region that Ukraine still controls, withdrawing without a fight. That is obviously something that the Russians have been asking for, but that is basically political poison for President Zelenskyy. You can imagine soldiers coming back from the front lines asking, why were we in those trenches for so many years if we were just going to hand it over without a shot fired? So that is something that is basically a kind of political time bomb for Zelenskyy if he were to agree to it, and you can't really see him signing off on that. He's already said that he doesn't have the legal or moral right to do that, but that is the Russian kind of demand. Again, people here in Ukraine think that's about destabilizing Ukraine in the future so that Russia can come back and take more territory. And I think from the Ukrainian side, the big unclear, unresolved issue is security guarantees, right? NATO seemingly off the table for now, but some kind of hard and fast, legally binding security guarantees, not just from the Europeans, but also from the US side. That has been a key Ukrainian demand, and there's no real sign that the Trump team, let alone his negotiators Witkoff and Kushner, are offering anything that comes close.
And Nick, new data is showing that Ukraine faces a military aid shortfall as its European allies struggle to plug the U.S. gap. What sort of impact is that now potentially having on the battlefield?
I think, Sarah, we haven't seen it yet because there's always a significant lag, right, between the money arriving and then those deliveries coming. But I think the only obvious source of that money is the Russian assets held in Belgium, right? And for now, the Belgians are worried about confiscating rather than freezing that money because of legal repercussions in the future. But that is basically the only game in town, and the Europeans now have to work on that to provide Ukraine with more money next year.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you.